Tiny Tim became an overnight sensation in the late 1960s with his falsetto rendition of Tiptoe Through the Tulips, but his fame faded almost as quickly as it arrived. Financial problems forced him to continue performing despite suffering from severe heart disease. In September of 1996, he suffered a heart attack after a concert but ignored doctors' warnings to stop performing. Just 2 months later, he collapsed on stage during another performance, suffered another massive heart attack, and died the following day. Here's some footage of one of nature's most gruesome mating rituals. Male honeybees, known as drones, die immediately after mating when their reproductive organ is ripped from their body, tearing open their abdomen and killing them within seconds. During her only mating flight, a queen typically mates with 10 to 20 drones, though some mate with 40 or more, storing enough sperm to fertilize eggs for the rest of her life. In 1859, English settler Thomas Austin released just 24 European rabbits into the Australian wilderness to hunt them for sport. But with few natural predators and ideal conditions, the population exploded into billions within decades, devastating native ecosystems, stripping vegetation, causing massive soil erosion, and becoming one of the worst invasive species disasters in history. Once one of Britain's biggest television stars thanks to her role on EastEnders, Daniela Westbrook's life was completely derailed by a severe cocaine addiction. She later admitted to using staggering amounts of the drug at the peak of her addiction, spending around $400 daily and using up to 5 grams a day. Years of abuse destroyed much of her nasal septum, causing part of her nose to collapse and requiring numerous reconstructive surgeries. She's also survived uterine cancer, sepsis, facial fractures, and repeated relapses, with her appearance becoming one of the most striking examples of the effects of long-term cocaine abuse. Between 1974 and 1975, an unidentified serial killer known as the Doodler stalked gay nightclubs across San Francisco, where he sketched men before luring them to secluded areas and stabbing them to death. Investigators believe he murdered at least 5 men, while 3 other victims survived. Police reportedly identified a prime suspect, but the surviving victims refused to testify because they were afraid to publicly come out as gay, and the case remains unsolved more than 50 years later. In 2015, 32-year-old Jonathan Buckaloo visited a chiropractor in Georgia for a routine neck adjustment when he suddenly suffered a vertebral artery dissection, triggering a catastrophic brainstem stroke. He was rushed to the hospital, but despite showing classic signs of a stroke, doctors allegedly failed to diagnose him for more than 12 hours. By the time treatment finally began, the damage was irreversible. Buckaloo was left with locked-in syndrome, a rare condition in which a person is fully conscious but almost completely paralyzed, unable to move, speak, eat, or breathe on their own, with communication limited to only slight eye movements. He now requires around-the-clock care for virtually every aspect of his daily life. A jury eventually awarded him $75 million, finding that the hospital's delayed diagnosis and treatment caused his permanent disability. The chiropractor was found not liable after calling 911 immediately after Buckaloo collapsed, and the claims against him were later dismissed. Connor Murphy rose to fame as one of YouTube's biggest fitness influencers, amassing millions of followers through bodybuilding videos, pranks, and physique transformations. However, beginning around 2020, his content became increasingly erratic, featuring bizarre spiritual claims, extreme fasting experiments, psychedelic usage, and multiple psychiatric hospitalizations that alarmed many longtime fans. On July 7, 2026, police in Thailand responded to reports that the 32-year-old American was acting strangely outside the luxury lakeside home he'd been renting with his girlfriend. Witnesses said he was shouting, rolling on the ground, attempting to get into passing vehicles, and making prayer-like gestures before fleeing from responding officers by running into a nearby lake. He continued swimming until he became exhausted and soon disappeared beneath the surface. Rescue divers recovered his body 30 minutes later from roughly 66 feet offshore. Investigators reported no signs of foul play, but found 2 unused syringes and several unidentified pills among his belongings, while his rental home had reportedly been left splattered with paint and extensively damaged in the hours before his death. An autopsy and toxicology tests are now underway to determine exactly what led to the tragic outburst and drowning. Just before the 2015 NFL season, Giants defensive end Jason Pierre-Paul severely injured his right hand when a powerful firework exploded prematurely. The blast shattered multiple bones, caused extensive burns, and forced doctors to amputate some of his fingers. But despite the life-changing injury, he returned to the NFL and later won a Super Bowl title with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In 2015, 22-year-old former Disney World performer Devin Staples, who had previously played Gaston and Goofy at the park, was celebrating the 4th of July with some friends when he attempted to launch a fireworks mortar from the top of his head. The shell exploded instantly, killing him at the scene. His family later said he wasn't trying to do something reckless. He was only pretending to as a joke when the fireworks unexpectedly ignited. This was the moment a single explosion turned Mexico's largest fireworks market into a war zone. The 2016 blast ignited hundreds of tons of fireworks at the San Poblito market in Tultepec, triggering a chain reaction of explosions that leveled most of the market within seconds. At least 42 people were killed and nearly 100 more were injured, with many victims suffering catastrophic burns. Homes surrounding the market were heavily damaged, and several children required treatment for burns covering 90% of their bodies. Despite the disaster, the market was eventually rebuilt, even though Tultepec had already experienced multiple deadly fire explosions in previous years. Here's some incredible footage of something you never see after a major sporting event. Thousands of fans voluntarily staying behind to clean the stadium. These spectators had just finished watching Japan play, but instead of heading for the exits, many remained in the stands collecting trash and wiping down their sections. The tradition is deeply rooted in Japanese culture, where cleaning shared spaces is often viewed as a basic responsibility and a sign of respect for others. In Japan, many students even help clean their own schools instead of relying on janitors. The result is scenes like this, where entire sections of a packed stadium are left looking almost untouched long after the final whistle. Here's a rare look at one of the most elusive underwater creatures on Earth. Captured more than 5,000 feet beneath the ocean's surface near an offshore oil rig, this giant deep staria jellyfish looks less like a real animal and more like something straight out of a horror movie. Its enormous translucent body and dark ghostly appearance have led many people to compare it to a Dementor from Harry Potter. Unlike most jellyfish, Deep Staria lacks long tentacles and instead uses its massive bell as a living net, wrapping itself around prey in the darkness of the deep sea. Because they inhabit some of the most inaccessible regions of the ocean, sightings are extremely rare, and scientists still know surprisingly little about how these mysterious animals live and reproduce. This was the moment a jogger suddenly shoved the woman into the path of an oncoming double-decker bus and then kept running. Footage from London's Putney Bridge shows the woman being pushed directly into traffic just seconds before the bus reached her. Miraculously, the driver swerved just in time, missing her by inches and preventing what could have been a horrific death. The shocking footage sparked a massive manhunt, but despite clear video of the incident, police couldn't identify the runner. For years, the mystery remained unsolved as investigators searched tirelessly for the man responsible. Nearly a decade later, authorities finally tracked him down and revealed his identity: Nicholas Brandrum, a wealthy investment banker. He was soon arrested in 2025 and ultimately convicted of assault. This was the moment Dutch aerobatic pilot Noreen Melkomjohn came terrifyingly close to being ripped from her aircraft thousands of feet above the ground. During a high-speed aerobatic flight, the plane's canopy suddenly burst open and shattered, blasting her with hurricane-force wind and flying debris. The force was so intense that she temporarily lost vision in one eye and struggled to breathe, yet she somehow maintained control of the aircraft while continuing to perform emergency procedures. Despite the severe wind pressure and the constant risk of losing control, Noreen managed to safely land the plane and walked away alive from an incident that easily could have turned fatal within seconds. In 1935, Ann Cooper Hewitt, daughter of wealthy inventor Peter Cooper Hewitt, checked into a San Francisco hospital for what she believed was a simple appendectomy, but woke up unknowingly sterilized. Her own mother had secretly convinced the surgeons to tie her fallopian tubes while she was under anesthesia. The motive was pure greed. Anne's father's will stated that if she ever had children, she would inherit millions. But if she died childless, her fortune would revert to her mother. To secure the money, her mother permanently destroyed her ability to have children, then tried to justify it by calling Anne mentally unfit and promiscuous. Anne later sued in one of the most shocking court cases of the 1930s, but despite national outrage, the criminal charges were quietly dropped. The case was settled in private, and Anne's mother never spent a single day in prison. For the rest of her life, Anne struggled deeply with depression and died at just 40 years old, while her mother outlived her by more than a decade and died comfortably in 1969. In January of 2013 in Blackpool, England, 16-year-old Sasha Marsden left home for what she believed was a hotel job interview arranged through Facebook, but the listing was fake. It had been set up by 30-year-old David Minto, a violent offender who used it to lure her to his guest house. That night, when Sasha didn't return, her parents went to the same address and knocked on the door. Minto answered and calmly told them she had already left. But inside, he had already attacked her, stabbing her 58 times through a sustained assault. Her body was hidden just feet away from where her parents had been standing. After the killing, Minto tried to cover it up, moving her body and attempting to clean the scene. Her remains were later discovered nearby, partially concealed. Investigators uncovered the fake job posting and traced it back to him, along with physical evidence linking him directly to the attack. Minto had a documented history of violence and had been released from prison not long before the murder. He was arrested, charged, and later convicted of Sasha's murder, receiving a life sentence with a minimum term of at least 30 years. In December of 1988, Hollywood cameraman Bob Samuels, whose credits included Short Circuit, The Color Purple, and Beverly Hills Cop 2, was found shot to death in his Northridge home, killed through a pillow used as a crude silencer. Investigators later accused his estranged wife, Mary Ellen Samuels, of arranging the murder to collect a $500,000 life insurance payout. Afterwards, she was said to have spent lavishly, including a Cancun trip where photos surfaced of her posing nude with large amounts of cash. Prosecutors also alleged that when the hired gunman began cooperating with authorities, she arranged for him to be strangled before he could testify. She was ultimately convicted for her role in the conspiracy and sentenced to life in prison. In August of 1993, 6 Kazakhstani hikers died during a trek through Siberia's Kamar-Daban mountain range. The only survivor later told investigators that members of the group suddenly began screaming, bleeding from their eyes and ears, foaming at the mouth, and clawing at their throats before collapsing one by one on the mountainside. Official reports ultimately ruled most of the deaths as hypothermia, with the group leader reportedly dying from a heart attack. But the survivors' description of the final moments has kept the incident controversial, with theories ranging from altitude sickness and poisoning to extreme weather exposure. In October of 1967 in Arcadia, Florida, 7 children ages 2 to 8 were poisoned after eating lunch at home. Within hours, they were convulsing, foaming at the mouth, and dying, some collapsing at school and others found at the house. All 7 were tragically gone by the time their parents reached the hospital. Their father, James Joseph Richardson, was quickly blamed and convicted in 1968, largely on circumstantial evidence and jailhouse informants, and sentenced to death. The jury was never told that the babysitter, Bessie Reese, who served the food, was a convicted killer out on parole. Years later, Reese repeatedly confessed to poisoning the children while in a nursing home, often saying over and over again, "Lord, forgive me." By then, Richardson had already spent over 2 decades in prison, narrowly avoiding execution. He wasn't released until 1989 after hidden evidence finally surfaced. No one was ever charged for the murders. Reese died in 1992, and Richardson lost 21 years of his life to a conviction that was never fully undone. Steven Hillenburg, the legendary creator of SpongeBob SquarePants, was a former marine biology teacher who turned his love of ocean life into one of the most successful animated TV shows in history. But in 2017, he revealed he'd been diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, a progressive neurodegenerative disease that slowly destroys the body's ability to move, speak, and eventually breathe. Hillenburg continued working on SpongeBob during his illness before dying in California in 2018 at the young age of 57. The character he created went on to outlive him, becoming one of the most recognizable animated figures in the world. Dutch artist and inventor Bart Jansen became known for turning dead animals into functioning drones after mounting motors and propellers onto taxidermied pets and wildlife. His most famous creation was Orville, a pet cat that was killed by a car and later transformed into a flying drone because Jansen said he wanted to give him a new life. He's also created drone versions of an ostrich, a shark, and several other animals, and later announced plans to build an airborne drone from a dead cow. Jansen says the projects are meant to blur the line between life, death, and technology. In May of 2024, Jack Joseph Ball murdered his 30-year-old pregnant sister, Bethany Ann Israel, during what was supposed to be a family dinner at his Lakeville, Minnesota home. She was approximately 18 weeks pregnant. When she stopped responding later that night, their mother went to the house and discovered large amounts of blood, prompting a 911 call. Police found an exceptionally violent scene inside the home, including a pool of blood in the kitchen, blood spattered on cabinets, a saw, a hatchet, and dismembered body parts. Investigators said Ball had scattered her remains, including placing a body part on a neighbor's front step. He fled the scene but was later found hiding in a nearby backyard with a self-inflicted knife wound to his neck. Handwritten journals recovered from the residence revealed Ball's fixation on his sister's pregnancy, stating he was angry because she'd lost her virginity and was therefore no longer innocent. The medical examiner ruled her death as complex homicidal violence. Ball has pleaded guilty to premeditated first-degree murder of his sister and her unborn child. This innocent-looking photo was one of the last selfies taken of Chris Kremers and Lee Sanfroon on April 1, 2014, shortly before they vanished while hiking the El Pianista Trail in Panama. The photo was taken near the trail's end, where hikers are supposed to turn back, but for some reason, the two continued deeper into the jungle instead. In the days that followed, Froon's phone was repeatedly powered off and on as emergency calls were attempted. On the night of April 8th, her camera captured over 90 flash photos in total darkness. Among them is a disturbing close-up believed to show the back of Kremers' head with strands of hair lit up by the flash. It's unknown if either woman was alive by the time these photos were taken. Months later, their backpacks and skeletal remains were found scattered along the jungle, and the exact circumstances of their deaths remain unknown. In 2017, Brooke Preston was brutally killed inside her home by her longtime friend and roommate Randy Herman Jr. after he stabbed her 25 times. Herman admitted he carried out the attack but claimed he was sleepwalking and had no memory of killing her. Investigators found no medical or behavioral evidence to support a sleepwalking episode, and prosecutors argued the number, placement, and force of the wounds showed conscious intent. The sleepwalking defense was ultimately rejected by the jury, who convicted Herman and sentenced him to prison for the rest of his life. On March 1, 2026, a shooting occurred inside Baptist Health Brookwood Hospital shortly after 24-year-old Precious Johnson had given birth to her first child. Police said Johnson had delivered a healthy baby just minutes earlier when around 9:30 p.m., her 19-year-old husband, Kenneth Terry Jr., pulled out a handgun he had brought into the hospital room and fatally shot her before turning the gun on himself. Both were pronounced dead at the scene, while the newborn baby survived and was not reported injured. The hospital immediately went into lockdown as officers secured the maternity floor and confirmed there was no ongoing threat. Family members later said the couple had been experiencing serious relationship problems in the weeks leading up to the birth, including disputes over which relatives would be present at the hospital. On Christmas Eve in 2008, 45-year-old Bruce Jeffrey Pardo arrived at his ex-wife's house in California wearing a Santa Claus suit and carrying multiple firearms. When the front door was opened by an 8-year-old girl, he shot her in the face before opening fire at a crowded family Christmas party. Bruce then unleashed a homemade fuel dispensing device hidden inside a wrapped present, igniting a massive fire that trapped victims inside as the house burned. 9 people were killed, some by gunfire, and others burned so badly that it took investigators several days to identify them. The fire burned so intensely that parts of Bruce's Santa suit melted onto his skin, forcing him to flee while still on fire. He later drove to his brother's house, where he turned the gun on himself. Investigators later determined the attack was driven by rage over a recent divorce, mounting financial pressure after losing his job, and a bitter custody dispute, with Bruce specifically targeting his ex-wife and her family. Police discovered that he'd spent months preparing, stockpiling weapons, booby-trapping vehicles with explosives, and compiling a list of additional targets including his ex-wife's divorce attorney, making the attack one of the most disturbing holiday massacres in U.S. history. In 2015, 20-year-old Lauren Bunner took his ex-girlfriend, 18-year-old Jolie Callan, hiking at Mount Cheaha, the highest point in Alabama. Just before sunset, he took a haunting photo of her taking in the view at the edge of a cliff, completely unaware it would be the last thing she ever saw. Moments later, he shot her twice in the head before pushing her body off the mountain. Bunner later called 911 and calmly confessed, claiming it was part of a suicide pact he couldn't go through with, but investigators found no trace of such an agreement. It was premeditated murder, and in 2017, Bunner was sentenced to 52 years in prison for killing the girl he once called the love of his life. In 2009, Michelle Fox was accidentally shot in the face by her husband while he handled a loaded shotgun. The blast destroyed almost everything. She lost both her eyes, nose, and entire upper palate. Surgeons couldn't fully rebuild her, so they created a custom magnetic prosthetic face made from silicone and acrylic that literally snaps onto metal implants in her skull. She now lives every day with part of her face detachable, a tragic reminder of how one careless moment can erase your identity in a split second. In April of 2023, 22-year-old Mercedes Vega vanished after parking her car in the garage of her Tempe, Arizona apartment complex. Hours later, her body was discovered in the backseat of a burning vehicle miles away in the desert. Investigators later found her blood in the parking garage, proof she'd been attacked there before being taken and left to die. The autopsy revealed she'd been beaten, shot, and had bleach poured down her throat, and that she was still alive when the fire was started, ultimately dying from burns and smoke inhalation. For almost a year, the case remained unsolved until police arrested 22-year-old Sincere Hayes, linking him to the torturous murder. However, authorities believe more suspects were involved, leaving the Vega family tormented by the thought that others who helped burn Mercedes alive may still be free. In 1978, 15-year-old Mary Vincent was hitchhiking through California when 51-year-old Lawrence Singleton offered her a ride, a decision that would lead to one of the most horrific crimes in modern history. After gaining her trust, Singleton bound her with rope, brutally sexually assaulted her for several hours, and hacked off both of her arms with a hatchet before throwing her off a 30-foot cliff to die. But Mary somehow found the strength to try and survive. Naked, pouring blood, and mutilated, she packed mud into her wounds to slow the bleeding, then crawled up the steep mountain and walked for miles down a deserted road, leaving a trail of blood behind her. The first car that saw her sped away in shock, but a honeymooning couple eventually stopped and saved her life, wrapping her in towels and racing her to help. While barely clinging to consciousness, Mary gave police a description so accurate that it led to Singleton's arrest within days. But despite the unimaginable brutality of his crime, Singleton served only 8 years before being released on good behavior. And just over a decade later, he struck again just like Mary said he would. In 1997, police found the body of 31-year-old mother of 3 Roxanne Hayes inside his home, stabbed multiple times and left in a pool of blood, murdered after he lured her inside under false pretenses. Singleton was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, but died of cancer in prison in 2001 while awaiting execution. Mary survived, learned to live with prosthetic arms, and became an artist and advocate for victims' rights. During the midnight premiere of The Dark Knight Rises in Aurora, Colorado, a 24-year-old shooter entered the packed theater through an emergency exit wearing full body armor, tossed gas canisters into the crowd, and opened fire with an AR-15, a shotgun, and a Glock. In just 90 seconds, he fired more than 70 rounds, killing 12 and injuring dozens more as movie sound effects mixed with real screams. Among the victims was Alex Sullivan, celebrating his 27th birthday and first wedding anniversary, Jessica Gawi, a 24-year-old reporter who'd narrowly escaped a Toronto mall shooting just weeks earlier, and 6-year-old Veronica Moser, who was killed instantly beside her 25-year-old mother, Ashley. Ashley was shot in the neck and abdomen, left paralyzed, and lost her unborn baby, later waking up in the hospital repeatedly asking where Veronica was, not realizing she was gone. The shooter was found calmly waiting outside, calling himself the Joker, while police discovered his apartment rigged with explosives meant to kill the investigators who entered. His notebook revealed a cold plan to maximize casualties, as he was sentenced to 12 life terms plus 3,300 years, but survivors say no punishment could ever possibly match the horror inflicted on that night.